Welcome to another episode of the Reach Your Prime podcast. I'm your host, Jared Barnes, and really excited today, guys, have an incredible guest in Miss Tori Stevens. Tori, like me, a fellow entrepreneur, but has just had an incredible journey, spending 5 years in higher education at Central Michigan University, home of the Chippewas, and UNC Charlotte, home of the 49ers, and then also spent 5 years in the corporate world, but decided to take the leap into entrepreneurship. And I don't want to steal her thunder, but Tori, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Very excited to be able to tell my story that landed me working now for myself as an entrepreneur. So I'm 33. I've got the job hopper label on me. A company could potentially say I'm not loyal. You could say that I'm still trying to figure out who I am. And I say that because I have had 10 jobs in 10 years. I don't own a suit. I have a tattoo and can't wait to get another one. Still trying to figure out what that is. I have a very energetic personality, and trust me, have been told numerous times when I've had to have a position in a cube environment that I'm really loud for that environment. I've worked for Davenport University as an admissions rep in Michigan. I've worked for Central Michigan University in career services. I've worked for UNC Charlotte in their career service department, and now I teach as an adjunct faculty at Queen's University. And I also have a master's in higher education, specifically in educational leadership, and a teaching certificate. So I've also done a couple of internships in higher ed where I taught first-year experience courses, and I also was an academic advisor in the summer for orientation for a couple of summers. I've also had a multitude of corporate jobs. So my first job out of college in 2008 was with a logistics company, C.H. Robinson, moving freight around the country. I've also worked for Randstad SourceRight. That's a third-party recruiting company, and I sat in MetLife space. And then for the past 3.5 years before I left corporate, I worked for Bank of America in 3 different jobs, either in talent acquisition, specifically in campus recruiting. I've also worked in procurement on their leadership development team. And I also worked in the chief financial officer space, specifically hiring a consulting team. So a multitude of different positions.
And Tori, I love it, and I appreciate you sharing your background. And Tori, I just want to dive in a little bit, about your experience before we get into what you're doing now. Just your experience specifically in higher ed. In what did you learn? You mentioned 3 different institutions. What did you learn, in your role within admissions and career services that you may not have seen, as a student or early in your career, has given you that perspective around who students are today, who millennials are today, and what they need, in a sense, as support?
Sure. The thing that always gravitated me towards higher ed, and the thing that gravitates me towards being an entrepreneur and working with millennials, is I truly feel like we don't understand who we are. Adrienne Brown is one of my most favorite resources, and she talks about that instead of trying to fit into a mold, that we need to recognize how to belong. And belonging means that you're being authentic to yourself. And so what I say now lately is that focus on inclusion and diversity will follow. Yeah, so I think you have to know that each person is their own individual. And when you place an expectation on how somebody should act or behave within an experience or a situation, you're going to be burdened because now you've thought because this person did X, the reaction is going to be Y. And so what you miss is the opportunity to learn from that person and to listen to that person and to hear where that person's coming from, because their environment and the society that they were brought up in and the experiences that they've had up until that point that you've met them and now you walk through that situation with them has created who they are. So instead of just seeing the person who's in front of you and trying to stereotype or label or put them in a box or make them fit, you have to recognize that that is an authentic person who's walked through life, and everything they've done has created a ripple effect in their life of where they are now.
As you're speaking, I immediately think of Tinto's retention theory. And the number one thing that is equating to retention is sense of belonging. and that feeling as if you're part of something, but also the fact that somebody sees you as you and truly cares about you as an individual human being. In your experience specifically as a career advisor and even in admissions, how did you see that being fostered, or what lack did you see of that? Was there a gap in that being fostered?
I love Simon Sinek. So what I focus on is the why of somebody. So Simon Sinek said, it's not what you do, it's why you do what you do. People show up in your life and you walk through situations, not just because you have to do something in order to accomplish a task, but there's a feeling that comes along with it. What I say is that in order for you to be able to have the future that you want, you have to show up in your present life. So what I do when I'm talking about when I was a career advisor or when I was in admissions, I would ask the why question. Why did you like that exercise? What did you like about that project? Why didn't you like that project? Who do you gravitate to? Why do you gravitate towards that person? When I'm working with people now, from a career perspective, I always say that your resume is a mere reflection of who you've been and an opportunity to reflect who you want to be in the future. You literally can be whatever job or whatever career or whatever person that you want to. But the choice is how are you going to show up and how are you going to hold space in order for change to occur? And then how are you going to put energy and effort into while you're changing so that your future can look different? And in order to be able to do that, you've got to reflect on those transferable skills. You got to understand your why. And your why does not come from society and how you should yet again fit in.
You said hold space. I've never heard anyone use that term before, and I love it. What do you mean by that? And what does that look like, just on a day-to-day basis?
When I'm working with people from a career perspective, the panic button has been hit numerous times before they say, I would like to receive guidance or an accountability partner or helper assistant, right? So when I say you're holding the space, what I mean is that each and every day we have created habits and then we show up in our lives. And so these habits start from day one of your parents. The first thing that somebody says to your parents is create structure in your kid's life so that they know what's coming or they know what happens. Or college is the first time that it's a free-for-all for most people to be able to create their own habits. But the thing is that habits create comfort. And the thing is that you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable in order to create change, to do something that's going to shake you up a little bit. You have to recognize that this pattern, these habits that I have are not working for me, and that there is something rubbing up inside my soul that is not fitting me and that I need to address what that is. You have to start shifting your perspective, not knowing what the outcome is going to be, but in a place where you can sit down and listen in order to see what's coming on around you and to recognize how you're leveraging your day, because each person has the same amount of time to utilize in their day, but you have to decide how you're going to hold the space in order to recognize how you're showing up in your life. And then you have to recognize how you want to reflect what you're learning back into your life so that your future can change.
I can only imagine going from that highly energetic and creative environment, and now you're in the corporate world. So talk to us a little bit about your transition from higher ed into corporate America and just what that was like, your key learnings, and how you felt personally in that space.
When I was in Michigan, I'm an only kid and nobody in my family has lived outside of Michigan. And I was like, I gotta go. And it was literally foreign words coming out of, I was like, I've never said these words before. I don't know what this means. I don't know what my future is gonna look like. And the reason why I said I had to leave is because I love Central Michigan University, and I will sing it to the top of my lungs that if Mount Pleasant, Michigan, this teeny tiny town that's in the middle of a cornfield, was in a city like Charlotte, I probably would be still at Central Michigan University because I was living on cloud nine, but I was missing the part of me. I had lost my personal growth because I was giving so much to everybody else's growth. And I recognized that yet again, nothing was going to change until I held the space in order for it to change. I decided I wanted to move. And so through some awesome occurring events that happened in my life, I literally, Charlotte, North Carolina, landed in my lap. So did the job, and so did a place to stay. It was like literally meant to just be, but I think it wasn't just meant to be. It's because I had showed up a year prior to do all this work, to build the network, to build the rapport, to build connections outside of Michigan. I was my authentic self and personality through meeting all these people, so they knew what I was about. And so when I moved to Charlotte, I quickly realized that unfortunately, the university that I was at was not a fit. I think when it comes to like your transferable skills and when it comes to like how you're showing up in the workforce, you really got to be sitting down in your soul saying, I recognize who I am and I recognize the opportunities that I bring. And it is okay that I'm not being accepted by others because I don't want to just fit in. I want to belong, and I want to make sure that I am being inclusive to my environment, which will just spread self-awareness and will just spread self-disclosure and will make this place more diverse at the end of the day.
And when you were going through all this, how did you begin to identify the right fit or the right environment for you? Or, how did you begin to dream that up? But a lot of times we get caught up in this idea and not actually like what it is. How did you find that, begin to identify, hey, I think I'm going to want this in my new environment. I'm going to need to be around these type of people.
Sure. So I think that I have always had this like kind of tap on my shoulder happening for 10 years that I thought I was filling because I was giving to others. So I've always known that something wasn't sitting right in me and I wasn't seeing what I wanted to do in my future, but I tried to make it for others and I wasn't making it for myself. So I always knew that basically there was this gap between where people are and where companies want people to be, and that it wasn't being filled because there was a lack of authentic connection and communication that was not happening.
Right.
But I wanted to know the people that had the grit in order to see and take a risk and be uncomfortable and to test their value and to show up regardless if they knew how the outcome was going to be. And so I started asking people about situations in their life and how they had shown up and taken a risk. And I would sit back and listen to what they were saying. And then after I would meet them, I would send them a follow-up email and I would say, I really liked what I heard about this, that, and the other thing of your past life. I'd really like to dive more into that and to talk about what you did and how you felt and how you showed up for yourself in order to take that risk. Because I wanted to find if I could hear like commonalities in people. I wanted to see like what was the tipping point that took them over the edge in order to do that. And I wanted to find individuals that knew that taking a calculated risk was important, because I think that the minute that you start getting comfortable with life and you find that heavy set pattern, you become ordinary. I think when you become ordinary, you stop challenging who you are. And I think that
Exactly.
you miss out on the opportunity in order to grow and develop as a person, which is why I named my company Evolyoution. Yoution is how I spell it. So I put you in the middle, because you constantly are evolving your life. I had this woman 2 years ago that I sided up to her and said, I want to know how you've taken risk in your life. I see your personality and I see your grit and determination. And I see that you're an authentic individual. Tell me about you. And so she did. And then she fired back at me, tell me about you. And I said, well, most people don't ask me, and I'm asking most of the questions. And she goes, I told her about this idea that I'm now doing with Evolyoution. And she says to me, when are you going to let that idea not be rent free in your head? Right. And she says, and I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, you keep doing all this free service for everybody else. And she's like, when are you going to earn a paycheck off of it so that you can step into your own and you can be your authentic self, not in just these 1 hour conversations with people
Right.
that you seek out, but that you're doing it 24/7.
I was going to ask, what was the tipping point for you?
That was the tipping
Because a
point.
lot of, yeah, yeah. And a lot of times I talk to entrepreneurs, they articulate a moment or series of events that led them to take that leap. And so you mentioned, being ordinary. And while, again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with being ordinary, but I think there is a problem with being complacent. That I think that's almost an epidemic now where I want to be great, but I don't necessarily want to put in the work that's required to be great. But I think there's something special about being in an environment that pushes you. And so now you mentioned making that leap and those points that kind of pushed you. What have you learned since taking that leap?
And you create your own destiny, regardless if you're working for somebody else or yourself. I got up, it was last Wednesday, and I had a back-to-back packed schedule. And I was super grumpy about it because even though my schedule was back-to-back, I had an internal laundry list of 1 mile long that I still knew I needed to accomplish. And I felt
Absolutely.
like I wasn't getting a dent done. And I was like about ready to do this like back to back. And also I'm thinking, you did this, Tori. You created your schedule. You're the one who signed up in order to meet with all these people. And now you're trying to be cranky that you are doing this, like that you've got this crazy schedule. It was probably the pivotal moment that I really came back to the thought of, you control your life, you control your destiny, and you control how you show up every day. You have to understand how you create your own happiness and how you show up in your life every day and how you have the opportunity in order to do the same thing the next day or to stop, hold the space, shift, pivot, whatever you want to do in order to then continue to keep moving forward and growing.
And it's so interesting. You mentioned it at the very beginning of the show, how a lot of times we don't reflect. There's a lack of reflection, in our lives because we're moving so fast. And I think a lot of times when people who want to be entrepreneurs or even, current entrepreneurs, why it can be so difficult and so tough is because there's no one to blame but you. But it takes time. It takes a lot of effort, and it can be very confusing, especially when there's no direction. And I think, and you can probably articulate this better than me, but when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a coach. Your feedback comes from the client or your consumer. And Tori, one of the last questions I want to ask you, as you've been on this journey, you mentioned, what you've learned professionally in this pursuit, this hustle, but what have you learned about yourself?
What I've learned for myself is, so Gandhi's quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world," is my bread and butter. And the reason why I absolutely adore that quote, and it constantly is in the back of my head, and it is another reason why my company's name is Evolyoution, from the focus on you, right? Is that this world is yet again, you cannot look at an external audience or society and think well, the reason why I operate or the reason how I show up is because somebody influenced me that way. I get it. They absolutely did. And then you have every right and choice to decide what you're going to do with that information, how you're going to leverage it, or what suitcases you're going to keep carrying with you for years and years, or what suitcases that you're going to drop, unpack, recognize, and move forward. If I don't vocalize the changes that I wish to see in this world, nobody is going to be able to know what's going on in my head. And I see all this opportunity, and I see an opportunity to be a part of this world that I want to see changed. And so I got to do something about it. You got to recognize that you are a gift on this world, and every person has an opportunity in order to make an impact, but your impact is not going to be able to be made until you choose personally how you want to show up in this world and how you want to change this world for the better. And that's where that whole be the change you wish to see in this world. And that's where the whole evolution comes in, is you have the opportunity to evolve into a person that you've walked through for the past however many years you've been on this planet.
That's it. And just listening to you, I get super fired up just listening to you. I really want to give you the chance to articulate everything you're able to do through evolution, really, explaining. Obviously, you just shared your journey, but now you're taking all of that, packaging it together into providing a service that helps people and really helping others accelerate their growth, accelerate their potential. We call this section just final thoughts. If you wanted to share a little bit about Evolyoution, what you guys are doing, and then, any final thoughts you had you want to share with the audience as well.
Sure. So Evolyoution has already shifted in what it was going to be to what it is now in 2.5 months since I've been an entrepreneur. What I'm focusing on right now is a couple of interesting things, in the sense of when I look at generational differences and how people are showing up in the workforce. I'm also looking at birth order when it comes to do baby boomers function like the firstborn? And do Gen X's function like the middle child? And do Gen Ys function like the youngest? And do Gen Zs function like an only child? So I'm also looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then there's this whole piece on involution, which is interesting in the sense of what self-awareness and exploration and discovery and how you understand yourself and the love that you provide and transformation and mastery, that these are all different topics of belonging that people are exploring in order to be able to be authentic and show up in their life. And so I'm taking all of that and I'm starting to packaging it into workshops, presentations, conferences, and speaking engagements. So that is Evolyoution. I'm trying to figure all of this out, but that's where my head is at when it comes to, again, how do I want to show up for the future, and what tools do I want to provide people now so that they have those seeds with them and they can sprout and grow as they continue to water them throughout their life by giving to themselves and showing up in their life.
Evolution is evolving. Evolving. You heard it here first. Tori, thank you so much for being on the show. Last question. Where can we find you? Whether it's social media, your website, email, what's the best way to reach you, and where can we find you on social?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So my name is Tori Stevens with a V in Stevens. It's just Evolyoution on Instagram and Facebook. And my email is toristevens.evolyoution@gmail.com.
Well, Tori, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. And now to the second half of our show. You'll hear from Miss Adrienne Brown. Adrienne has worked for Major League Baseball, multiple NFL teams, and is now a graduate student at the University of Florida pursuing her law degree. She has some excellent perspective from the sports business landscape and also what she's studying now as a law student to make a difference in the lives of collegiate student athletes and professional athletes. Adrienne, thank you so much for being on the show. Real quick, if you just wanted to briefly introduce yourself to our audience and we can go from there.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jared. I super love your podcast and I'm so happy to be featured on this super special episode. I am a law and master's in sport management dual degree student at the University of Florida. Honestly, I can't describe my dual degree in one word or a few words even. Every day I'm learning something new. I'm pushing myself and challenging myself to think differently. I'm surrounding myself with people who I've never pictured I would be in the same room with or even learning from. So every day is a new adventure. And I would just describe my experience as just that.
That's awesome. So, before we get into what you're doing now, flashback 2 years ago, did you see yourself in this space that you're in right now? If so, why? And if not, why not?
2 years ago, I had fully planned on being a law student at University of Michigan, Temple University, University of Texas, one of those 3 universities. I had applied to law school and not gotten in. So huge smack in the face of reality in terms of planning my 5-year plan. And I'm going to go to law school in 2015 and then just shot down confidence, for one. And two, it put a huge obstacle in front of me that I did not know whether or not I would get over. And it took working at the Philadelphia Bar Foundation. This was just after I finished my experience with the Eagles as a community relations assistant. But coming into a new role in the working world after graduation, everybody and their mom is going to go get graduate degrees. And here I am trying to enter the next level of my career and have been shut out. And I was defeated. I didn't talk about grad school for months. It was just completely something that I was deathly afraid of. And I had to get over that fear because I needed to know whether or not going to law school was for me or something that I was just interested in.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, what were you afraid of in particular when it came to graduate school?
Not being good enough, not feeling like I have a place in this society. Society has this level of elitism when it comes to education. If you don't have a master's degree, there are companies that won't hire you. So some people, including myself, I was like, oh, I need a master's degree so I can flex on everybody else.
Yeah.
But it then turned into, well, no, I need a master's degree to further expand on my education so I can then dive into XYZ world. I was so afraid that if I didn't go to law school after I told everybody that I'm applying to law school, of course I'm going to get in. Why wouldn't I get in? And I didn't. One, I look crazy. I look like a fraud. Dude, I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And that in itself had its own.
Interesting. Because, from the outside looking in, if I go to LinkedIn or I, Google you, it appears that, you have achieved, but yet you still have those feelings. I say all that to say, from your experiences, working with, major entities, whether that's Philadelphia Eagles or your roles with other organizations, what has led to your confidence being built?
I would first start by saying God, having this faith in myself and having my own personal relationship with God has really, really put me in a path to make me happy and keep me sane. Second, I want to thank my parents. This isn't an acceptance speech, but in a sense, my parents who, both grew up in poverty and both became Black engineers and met through being Black engineers, paved this way for me. I've seen my parents achieve quietly, happily, fruitfully, and I emulate characteristics from both of them: work ethic, perspective, all of those things. So, you mentioned me working with major entities, and I've done that. And I definitely think that there is value in that. But I do think that people place a lot of value and hype on how big the company is that you're working for, as opposed to what you're doing and what you're learning.
Interesting. Let's dive into that a little bit more. You explain that further. What do you mean by that?
Specifically, working with Major League Baseball, I was an office extern for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and I was directly working with a gentleman by the name of William Rolak. He was so encouraging, and we would essentially go around as interns, call universities and their sport management programs or other professors and try to get them to attend the Diversity Business Summit. When it first started in 2012, it was a huge thing. It's sport and its diversity of sport was becoming a new conversation. And we're not talking about athlete wise, but definitely front office wise, partnerships, vendors, executive leadership, interns, all of these facets. And while it was so great to work with MLB and have that crest on my resume, there was a lot of behind the curtains aspects. And being in it, I was pleasantly surprised by how diversity and inclusion had not been at the forefront of conversations within these major entities. I do think that getting to see behind the curtains makes you appreciate what you don't get to see on the day-to-day basis.
Interesting. Being in the space has allowed you to just gain that perspective around it. Not that it's bad, but also being able to see it for what it is. And I think that's what's given you that ability and platform to do what you do now. You mentioned different roles you were in. Why law? Why this specific area of research that you're focused in, if you wanted to expand it on that a little bit more?
Law has always been something that I wanted to do. Back in high school, one of the assistant general counsels for the Sixers, it was like a career day type of event that day. And I heard from him and I was just like blown away. Funny anecdote, I tore my ACL in high school and I was like, all right, what can I do aside from play sports? So I had a whole bunch of free time. And I knew that I loved sports and I wanted to be involved, but I didn't know how. So that pathway of tearing my ACL led me to think of different career opportunities that women and Black women have or could have in the sport industry. I didn't see a whole lot of Black attorneys. I also didn't see a whole lot of women attorneys. And I hadn't known anybody that had gone to law school, and I was super excited for that challenge. So law school was definitely it for me. I decided after graduation of high school that I would minor in sport management while I was at Howard University. And I was working in our sports information department, and I was an interviewer for the Hilltop Journal, which is Howard's magazine. And I was so immersed and I was like, okay, this is it. I want to do sports journalism. How can I incorporate law? Every time I would find something interesting about sports, law would go on the back burner. And it got to a point to where I'm like, can I continue to put law school on the back burner? And the answer became no. And I started the whole process to apply to law school and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. So I left the Philadelphia Eagles to pursue an opportunity in the legal field in Philadelphia as a legal aid fundraiser and marketing coordinator. And I was in love.
You said a phrase that just, it struck me. You said, I needed to know, whether this law thing, whether it was actually going to work out. What was that tipping point for you?
It's a hard question, Jared, because it was a culmination of things. I felt like there was something missing. But this particular feeling of something missing was that I'm not where I want to be. I'm happy, I'm working, my bills are paid, but this isn't where I see myself forever. I knew maybe it was subconscious or like deep in my gut type of feeling. It wasn't enough. And I had to pivot. I always felt like if I try this and I work really hard, I can get back.
I mean, I had a very similar journey and I made a pivot because I knew if I didn't pivot, if I didn't take that step and try, I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. And so when you did make that pivot, walk us through that.
Honestly, I had zero support from friends, family, current boss at that time. There was a notion of how could you ever leave a National Football League team? I didn't have my job secured by the time I left the organization. I don't tell people that a lot, but it took me 6 weeks to find something that I wanted, that I could do and that I could grow within. So my mindset at that point was from little things, big things grow. And I had to take these baby steps and I had to do informational interviews. I had to research and I had to learn where I needed to be, who the big players were out there in this new industry, and how can I align myself? So how do I market myself on an industry change and have those transferable skills from the sport industry, but still maintain my connection to the sports industry? And all of those little lily pads led me to the Bar Foundation. I kept that mindset of from little things, big things grow. And the supervisor at the time, who I asked about the volunteer position, had said, hey, what are you doing for the spring? And I was like, I don't know, just hanging around, learning. I really didn't have a great answer. And he looked at my resume and he was like, why don't you volunteer for us a couple days a week? Because I had found out that I didn't get into law school. And I was like, well, now what? And I didn't ask them. They didn't know that I was trying to go to law school, but they offered me a job and I took it. Instead of saying, oh, this isn't, it's nonprofit. So not a whole lot of money. And again, new industry, but it was marketing and I knew how to do that. So can I excel at this? Can I meet these people in this industry and really, really make sure that this is the right move? And I think that's the piece that people miss when they're switching industries. You really got to be strategic in that move. And my ability to research and learn about this really made me feel like I would be a good asset as a law student, because that's all that is: researching, writing, learning, growing, arguing. It's all kind of encompassed in the programs.
And you allowed yourself to be present in the context that you hope to be in. And that's what, in a sense, created space for the opportunity, where most people aren't necessarily willing to leave their comfort zone and bet on themselves. But that ability to do that, I think, fosters confidence in itself. And then doing that, then you create a space. You created space for the opportunity. You've gotten this opportunity. You had the experience at the Bar Association, and now you're at Florida. What are you hoping to accomplish at Florida? And then what's next?
Those answers change. And I won't say day to day because it's not that frequent. And maybe it's week to week, but in a sense, I was coming to law school to work in the sports industry and represent athletes in some way, shape, or form. Now, I knew I didn't want to be an agent. Now, whether that meant through my own marketing agency or if that meant I would be reviewing sport entrepreneurship opportunities. And I just wasn't sure all of those things that I could do because there are so many possibilities outside of being an agent. One thing I landed on at the beginning of my research was, how can I help stadiums impact the communities in which they reside? And that was super left field from exactly what I came into the application process thinking I was going to do. But now it ties in almost everything. It ties in the love for sport. It ties in my love for being a fan and going to these stadiums. It ties in real estate development, mergers and acquisitions, entrepreneurial aspects, venture capitalism. It ties in literally almost everything that I've ever thought about. So what I'm swimming toward would be more so of the understanding of all of the industries that encompass this one funneled goal of nonprofit, real estate, sport entity, and community development. All things that I love, things that I've done, things that I'm great at. So right now, I'm studying two separate aspects of sport concurrently and making sense of them both while still trying to keep my options open. I have to write down what I'm doing for the day, whether or not I've achieved it. I have a to-do list. I have it digitally. I have it written on a whiteboard. I have it in my phone. So that way, if I do get off topic, I know how to get back. Otherwise, it's like when, I think this is the story, Hansel and Gretel were dropping gumdrops leading up to the witch's house. So that way they can get back.
Again, listening to you, hearing like this underlying theme of just pursuing opportunity, where I think a lot of the times people get confused and think that jobs or careers or even their purpose is like a door that when you get to it, it just magically opens. Adrienne, if you were writing a letter to your younger self, maybe it's 10 years ago, 5 years ago, what specific areas of advice would you give?
Dear younger self, if you don't wield the power of shock and awe, you will never move forward.
What do you mean by that?
For me, the power of shock and awe means that if I'm not surprising myself or others and basking in that moment, then I'm not learning and I'm not growing. And those are the two most important things to me, is being a change agent, breaking down barriers, and forever learning. You can never stop learning. You can never stop reading. You can never stop growing. And I don't have time to be stagnant. I don't have time to be comfortable. It's important to be comfortable. I will say that. But at this stage, postgraduate education costs too much money for me to just chill.
The last question for you to close us out. You're in a 4-year program. You're doing all these things, but yet you have to take that long-term approach. How have you remained patient while still keeping that sense of urgency?
We are not on a journey, because a journey implies an end or a point at which you reach. And I am not on a journey. I am on a quest to find, to mold, and to reshift. So my program is 4 years long, but every day is a new day for me to learn, for me to meet people, for me to have these informational interviews, for me to talk to people like you who are doing amazing things as well. Taking those aspects each day at a time makes it seem like time is flying by so quickly. In doing all of these things, you got to keep in mind what's happening next. So that sense of urgency, it's really, really exciting to see what I can do in 24 hours to get me to the next 24 hours to prepare me for the next year or the next 2 years.
Adrienne, I really appreciate you sharing your story. This last section we just call Final Thoughts, just giving you a chance to share anything else you wanted to share. And then also at the end, if you could, share your social media handles and where we can find you.
Final thoughts. Never be afraid to do something different. And as much as you're going to hear about it, if you have to leave a big time job in order to find yourself and your purpose, do it. Don't get caught up in the how could yous or why would yous of the naysayers or the people who aren't on that part of the journey with you, because it is your life and only you can take advantage of you being happy and successful.
Yeah, then where can we find you on social if we want to follow you?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn. You know, if you're going to connect with me, add me a note on LinkedIn on why you want to connect so I can figure out how to help you.
Well, Adrienne, thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, I hope you took something away from today's show. Incredibly beneficial. Being able to have the courage, 4 seconds of courage can make a lifetime of a difference. So being willing to take that leap could change your whole trajectory of your life. But then bringing it back and having a perspective of taking advantage of the 24 hours each day that's been given to you. So guys, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.